It was just another Friday evening in New York City. Hundreds of people packed into a subway train, heading home after a long day, and nobody suspected a thing. The man driving the train wasn't a trained motorman. He had never operated this route before. Yet he was in control of a fast-moving train, heading straight into one of the sharpest curves in the entire subway system. In just seconds, the train jumped off the tracks, smashing into the tunnel walls. Wooden cars shattered like matchsticks. Screams echoed in the darkness. What caused this horrifying crash? This is the tragic story of the 1918 Malbone Street Wreck, which is also known as Brighton Beach Line accident. New York City, often called NYC, is one of the largest and busiest cities in the United States. As of 2020, more than 8.8 million people live here. It's located in the northeastern part of the country, in the state of New York, about 130 kilometers or 81 miles northeast of Philadelphia, and around 107 kilometers or 66 miles southwest of New Haven, Connecticut. New York City is connected by a massive rapid transit system. Most of it runs underground, especially through the packed streets of Manhattan, but it also stretches out into the surrounding boroughs. By 1905, two private companies controlled most of the subway: the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, or IRT, and the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company, known as the BRT. The BRT, founded in 1896, ran both passenger and freight trains across Brooklyn and Queens, and it was on one of the BRT's lines deep in Brooklyn. One of the key lines operated by the BRT was the Brighton Line. It opened in 1878 and ran through the borough of Brooklyn. The line was electrified and had between 2 and 6 tracks, depending on the section. Even today, the Brighton Line is still in use. It serves 20 stations and runs above ground at street level, through trenches, or deep underground. Southbound trains on the Brighton Line approached what is now Flatbush Avenue and Ocean Avenue from the northeast. From there, the track dropped steeply downhill and led into a short tunnel, just before Prospect Park Station. Inside that tunnel was a sharp S-curve. First, a gentle right turn, then a sudden, tight left. This curve helped trains line up with the station beyond the tunnel, but it was dangerous. The section was newly built at the time, and because of the steep slope and sharp turns, it had a strict speed limit, just 9.65 kilometers per hour or 6 miles per hour. The train involved in the crash was a 5-car subway train made up of old BU-type cars. These were wooden-bodied cars built around the year 1900. Some had steel frames, some didn't. A few were powered with electric motors. Others were just trailers, pulled along by the rest. On the night of the accident, the train had 3 powered cars and 2 trailers. Altogether, the train weighed over 120 metric tons, and it was packed with around 675 passengers. At the controls was a 25-year-old man named Edward Luciano, a name the city would never forget. It was Friday, November 1st, 1918. The 6:10 p.m. train left Park Row Terminal in Manhattan, heading for Brighton Beach in Brooklyn. By the time it reached Park Place Station around 6:40 p.m., the train was packed, wall to wall, with more than 650 people. Most were commuters heading home to start their weekend. At the front of the train was a 25-year-old man named Edward Luciano. It was his very first day as a subway motorman. Just hours earlier, he had brought the train into Manhattan from the King's Highway Yard in Brooklyn. Now, he was in charge of the return trip, carrying hundreds of lives with him. After leaving Park Place Station, Mr. Luciano guides the train along a long, straight section of track, heading toward the tunnel beneath Malbone Street, now called Empire Boulevard. Just ahead lies a dangerous curve. Trains are supposed to slow to a near walking speed before entering, but Luciano's train doesn't slow down. It races downhill toward the tunnel, faster and faster. By the time it reaches the entrance at 6:42 p.m., it's moving at no less than 50 kilometers per hour, or 30 miles per hour. Some say it may have been going as fast as 65 kilometers or 40 miles per hour. Then it happens. The back wheels of the lead car lift off the rails. The train is going too fast, and the tight curve can't hold it. The second car is yanked off the tracks and into the tunnel wall. Wooden cars shatter on impact. The second car disintegrates. The third car follows, with the same brutal force. Inside the tunnel, the concrete walls lined with steel supports act like a massive rasp, grinding the wooden train cars to pieces as they scrape along at high speed. Cars 2 and 3 are torn apart. The force is so violent they completely collapse. There's no space left inside for anyone to survive. The wreckage from these 2 cars slows the impact just enough for Car 4. It's damaged but not destroyed. Car 5, at the very back, remains almost untouched. But for the passengers in the middle of the train, there was no chance. At least 93 people were killed. Some reports say the number may have reached 105. Over 250 were left injured, many of them severely. The Malbone Street Wreck remains the deadliest disaster in the history of subway. Even now, more than 106 years later. At nearby Prospect Park Station, people hear the deafening crash echo through the tunnel, followed by the splintering of wood, and then silence. A thick cloud of dust rolls out from the tunnel's mouth, and then, out of the darkness, a man appears, his face bloodied, clothes torn, one shoe missing. He stumbles onto the platform, dazed and silent. People step back, unsure of what they're seeing. It takes a moment for the horror to register. Something terrible has happened underground. Eventually, someone sounds the alarm. At 7 p.m., firefighters and police arrive. To save time, the fire department uses ladders to climb down into the trench that runs alongside the tunnel, avoiding the longer path through the station. Some survivors try to flee the scene. Others are frozen in place, shocked by what they've seen. Witnesses hold them back, trying to help, but unable to fully understand what they've just witnessed. One of the first rescuers to enter the tunnel later described it to the New York Times as, quote, "a darkened jungle of steel dust and wood splinters, glass shards and iron beams projecting like bayonets. Firefighters move slowly, inch by inch, pulling aside broken train parts and twisted steel just to reach the wreckage. Every step forward is a battle." As the rescue continued, another crisis was unfolding above ground. The nearest hospital was already overwhelmed, filled to capacity with patients suffering from the deadly Spanish flu, which was sweeping through the city. With nowhere else to take the wounded, emergency crews set up a makeshift field hospital at nearby Ebbets Field, the local baseball stadium. Meanwhile, the dead were taken to the morgue. 83 bodies were lined up under white sheets. For families searching for loved ones, the nightmare wasn't over. One by one, they were forced to lift sheet after sheet, hoping not to recognize a face, but fearing that they would. As firefighters and rescuers worked through the night, pulling bodies and survivors from the twisted wreckage, one man was missing. The motorman, Mr. Luciano. Incredibly, Luciano had survived the crash with barely a scratch and had quietly slipped away from the scene. Hours later, he was found. No one knows exactly who tracked him down, but when confronted by a survivor named Mr. Darling, Luciano had little to say. "I lost control of the damn thing, that's all," he reportedly muttered. The investigation, run entirely by police, as was common back then, was quick to blame Mr. Luciano. The speed limit in the tunnel was extremely low, yet evidence showed that Luciano either didn't slow down at all or reacted far too late. To understand how this disaster happened, we need to go back 5 years, back to 1913. That year, the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company, BRT, signed a deal with the city of New York. The city would build new subway lines and lease them to BRT to run their trains. In return, the fare was locked at just 5 cents per ride, no matter how far the passenger traveled. That's about $1.55 or €1.42 today. But then came World War I. Inflation hit hard. By 1918, that nickel was only worth about 2.6 cents. Even worse, The contract banned any fare increase until the year 1962, over 4 decades later. Operating costs were rising fast. Trains needed repairs, tracks had to be maintained, and workers demanded higher pay. By the fall of 1918, the BRT was nearly bankrupt. While money was tight, tensions between workers and management were reaching a boiling point. The BRT refused to recognize the union representing its motormen, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, or BLET. Any driver suspected of being in the union was targeted. They were followed after work. They were punished for exaggerated or even fake violations. Many were given the worst shifts as a form of quiet punishment. By late 1918, the BLET had had enough. They threatened a strike. The BRT responded aggressively. They fired 40 motormen, about 10% of the entire driving staff, just for wearing a union pin. To make matters worse, the company accused them of being communists, hoping to turn public opinion against them. But the plan backfired. On the morning of November 1st, 1918, at exactly 5 a.m., motormen and conductors walked off the job. The BRT had seen the strike coming. Determined to keep the trains running, they pulled in anyone they could find: office staff, dispatchers, anyone with the slightest connection to rail operations. That's where Edward Luciano enters the story. Now, technically, this was Luciano's first day as a motorman, but that barely scratches the surface. He had worked for the BRT before, but not as a driver. He was a dispatcher. Conveniently, he wasn't part of the union. So when the strike hit, the BRT put him behind the controls of a passenger train. Normally, becoming a motorman was no easy task. First came a full medical check, followed by 60 hours of classroom lessons, a 90-question written test, then 60 hours watching a veteran driver in action. Only after passing all that could a trainee begin driving, and even then, only empty trains and rail yards, far from the public. But Luciano skipped almost all of that. He had parked an empty train once, a year earlier. He'd received just 5 hours of theory lessons, and had only spent 2 days riding along with a trained driver. Worse yet, he had never operated a train on the Brighton Line, the very route he was now assigned to. But there was more to Edward Luciano's story, deeply personal things that no one at the BRT seemed to consider. Just days before the crash, he had been seriously ill with the flu. He was still recovering, weak and unwell, on the very day he was asked to drive a train. Even worse, only 3 days earlier, Luciano had buried his 3-year-old daughter, lost to the deadly Spanish flu. Grieving, exhausted, and still sick, he was in no condition to operate a subway train. But the BRT put him behind the controls anyway. The tunnel where the train crashed was brand new, opened just a few weeks before the accident. Even most experienced drivers were still unfamiliar with it. It had been built as a shortcut, linking the Brighton Beach Line to Coney Island, skirting around a new main line still under construction. After the disaster, investigators took a close look at the tunnel itself, but found nothing wrong. The structure met all safety standards. The real danger wasn't in the concrete or the rails, it was in the system. Back then, there were no tools to monitor a train's speed. Everything depended on the driver's memory: when to slow down, how hard to brake, and exactly where to do it. It was all left to human judgment. During questioning, Mr. Luciano claimed he tried to slow the train as it neared the tunnel. But the wreckage told a different story. Investigators found no sign that he had reversed the motors, something that would have helped slow the train by turning the engines into generators. He hadn't pulled the emergency brake either. Survivors and people watching from the tracks said the same thing. He had struggled with the train's speed throughout the journey. Sometimes he overshot stations. Other times, he stopped short. In those final moments, the train barreled down a long, straight stretch of track, dropping 70 feet in elevation. At the bottom of that slope was a sharp curve. The investigation revealed something even more troubling. Mr. Luciano had been handed the keys to a badly put-together train. The subway cars he was driving included BU-type trailer cars, lighter than motor cars, but more top-heavy, especially when filled with passengers. To stay safe, there was a rule. Never place two trailer cars next to each other. Always separate them with a heavier motor car. That kept the train more stable. But Luciano's train broke that rule. It had one motor car at the front, followed by two trailers in a row, then two more motor cars behind them. Why? Investigators believed it was likely built by someone inexperienced. Many skilled yard workers were out on strike that day, and at King's Highway Yard, the job of putting the train together may have fallen to a replacement, someone who didn't know the dangers of that setup. Just hours after the crash, the Train Workers Union, the BLET, ended their strike. But their battle for official recognition would still go on for another year. New York's mayor at the time, Mr. Hylan, didn't hold back. He blamed the BRT for what had happened. Soon, Mr. Luciano stood in court, not alone, but alongside 5 BRT company officials. All 6 men were charged with manslaughter. The trial didn't take place in Brooklyn. It was moved to Nassau County, about 30 kilometers, or 18.6 miles, away. That was the farthest the law would allow it to go. Why? Because in Brooklyn, public anger was still boiling. At a pre-trial hearing, some survivors and family members shouted that the BRT officials should be shot. To protect the right to a fair trial, the court had to move the case out of the city. During the trial, Mr. Luciano stayed firm. He said he had been in control, but the train just wouldn't slow down. But this didn't match what investigators found in the wreckage. There were no signs that he tried to stop the train using any of the emergency systems. The court also didn't look into other possible reasons for his actions, like grief, sleepless nights, or how unfamiliar he was with both the train and the route. Instead, Mr. Luciano placed all the blame on a vague mechanical failure, one that no one could prove. In the end, no one was held responsible. By early 1921, all charges were either dropped or ended in a not guilty verdict. Not a single person ever served a sentence for the worst subway disaster in New York City history. As for Mr. Luciano, he changed his name to Mr. Lewis and left the tragedy behind. He quietly built houses in Queens, then retired to Tucson, Arizona, where he passed away in 1985 at the age of 91. While no one went to prison, the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company faced a different kind of reckoning, in courtrooms filled with grieving families demanding justice. By March 1921, the BRT had paid out $75 million in damages, an amount worth over $1.2 billion today. And then, they simply ran out of money. Today, more than a century later, the tunnel where the tragedy unfolded still exists. It now serves the Franklin Avenue Shuttle, a quiet, 4-station branch of the New York City subway. Over a century has passed, yet some questions still echo through that dark tunnel. Was the driver truly to blame? Could the BRT have done more? And have we really learned enough from disasters like this to prevent the next one? We'd love to hear what you think. Was justice served? Who should have taken responsibility? And how do you feel knowing part of that old street still bears the name Malbone today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.